If you had passed me on the street, just an old woman in a cardigan, holding a canvas tote from the farmer's market, you'd have never guessed the truth. You wouldn't have seen the scars beneath my skin, or heard the screams that once echoed behind the walls of my childhood home. You wouldn't know that once. I ran barefoot down a dirt road in the middle of the night, clutching my little sister's hand like her life depended on it, because it did. My name is Jeanette Garrett, and I'm 78 years old, most days. I sit on my porch in Jerome, Arizona, sipping strong coffee and watching the Red Rock Hills glow gold in the morning sun. My neighbors know me as the quiet lady with the white bun and calloused hands, the one who always bakes too many cookies for Sunday service. But I wasn't always this way, and my life didn't begin in peace. I was born in 1947, right after the war, into a home already broken by fear. By the early 1960s, when I was a teenager, we were living in a rust-bitten trailer on the outskirts of Jerome. Life had never been easy for us, not in a town that barely held itself together after the copper mines dried up. But it wasn't poverty that marked my childhood. It wasn't the leaky roof or the threadbare blankets or the fact that we never had enough meat in the stew. It was the silence, the kind of silence that clings to you long after the shouting stops. My mother, Shirley, was a small woman with thinning hair, always wrapped in a flannel dress and old slippers. She worked herself raw, scrubbing the floors of richer people's homes in town. She never complained. That was her way. She'd stand by the sink at night, washing dishes with red, cracked hands, her eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the window. My father, Calvin Garrett, worked down at the sawmill when he felt like it. He had the thick shoulders of a man used to hard labor and the temperament of a man who didn't care if he scared the life out of you. You could smell the whiskey on his skin before he walked through the door. When he raised his voice, the neighbors locked their windows. When he passed by, folks lowered their eyes and crossed the street. At home, his presence felt like a storm cloud. The air changed when he stepped into the room. His boots hit the floor like thunder. One look from him could still the whole house. But I didn't grow up alone in that storm. When I was 9, my little sister Lila was born. She came into this world tiny and screaming, and Mama was so weak afterward she could barely hold her. So I did. I changed her diapers, rocked her to sleep, sang her the lullabies Mama had long forgotten. I made her smile. She was my light in that dark place, the only good thing in that house. I swore to myself I'd keep her safe. I didn't yet know that some promises are impossible to keep. Lila was different from the start. She had big eyes and a laugh that could break through even the heaviest silence. She made up stories about queens and dragons and secret kingdoms hidden beneath our yard. When we were together, it felt like we were somewhere else, somewhere magic. But magic never lasts, not in houses like ours. When the screen door slammed and we heard Daddy's boots on the floor, the air shifted. Lila would stop laughing. I'd hide her drawings. Mama would make sure his plate was hot and his bourbon poured. If he was drunk, he might shout. If he was sober, that was worse. When he was sober, he hit. Back then, no one spoke of such things. People whispered but did nothing. The bruises on Mama's arms were hidden under sleeves. The dents in the trailer walls were patched with duct tape. And me, I kept my mouth shut, because I was scared too. I didn't know yet what he was truly capable of. But by the time I turned 13, I began to notice changes. Lila, once so joyful, began to retreat. She stopped playing outside when Daddy came home. She had nightmares. She clung to me at night and said she couldn't talk about it. I told myself it was just fear. After all, we were all afraid of him. I didn't realize it was something worse. Not until the night I got out of bed and followed the sound of his footsteps. Not until I saw the door to my parents' bedroom cracked open and witnessed the thing that would haunt me for the rest of my life. That night, a part of me died, and what was left, the girl who remained, wasn't afraid anymore. She was furious. She was desperate. And she was ready to run. I was just a little girl when I learned how to disappear. In our trailer on the outskirts of Jerome, Arizona, I could tell what kind of night it would be by the way my father closed the door. If it slammed, he was drunk, and he'd bark until he passed out. If it clicked softly, that was when I was most afraid, because it meant he was fully aware, calculated, cold. And when Calvin Garrett was clear-headed, someone paid for it. Most of the time, it was my mama. I remember standing in the hallway one night, no older than 7, barefoot on the linoleum. The light over the stove was still on. My mama was in the kitchen, her sleeve pulled halfway up her arm, showing a fresh bruise already blooming like a storm cloud on her skin. She noticed me watching and tugged the fabric down quickly. "Go on back to bed." "Jeanette," she whispered, "it's not your worry." But it was. It always was. By the time I was 9, I had learned how to cook scrambled eggs, scrub floors until they shined, and hush a crying baby. Lila was born that summer, in the middle of a heat wave that turned our trailer into an oven. Mama barely made it through the delivery. I remember her lying on the torn-up couch, her skin pale and damp, eyes half closed. The midwife handed me my baby sister like she wasn't sure anyone else would take her. So I did. I was the first one to hold Lila, the first one to sing to her, the first to rock her back and forth in that creaky chair in the corner of the bedroom while Daddy hollered in the next room about his supper being late. And I remember thinking clear as day that no one would ever hurt this little girl. I'd protect her from the world. But children can't fight monsters. Not alone. Lila was sunshine. I don't mean that poetically she really was. Even in a house as gray as ours, she found ways to shine. She'd make castles out of cardboard boxes and pretend our backyard was a kingdom filled with talking animals. She'd twirl in her hand-me-down dresses like she was a princess. And for a moment, we could both pretend that life was different. But things started changing when she was around 6. She stopped playing as much. Her drawings grew darker, people with blank eyes, houses with no doors. She'd stare off for long stretches, like she was listening for something I couldn't hear. And the worst part, she started avoiding Daddy. Not the way we all avoided him, with quiet footsteps and lowered eyes. Hers was deeper, fear that clung to her skin like smoke. If he walked into the room, she would shrink back. If he called her name, she'd flinch. If he tried to touch her shoulder, she'd tense like she'd been shocked. I noticed it first during dinner one evening. Calvin was unusually quiet, chewing his food while staring at her longer than he should have. Lila, sitting on the far end of the table, didn't eat a bite. She just kept her head down, her little fingers clenched around her fork like it was the only thing anchoring her to the earth. Mama noticed, too. I could tell by the way she kept glancing between them. She didn't say a word. She never did. But her silence screamed louder than anything. One night, I found Lila curled under the kitchen table, her tiny frame shaking. I got down beside her and wrapped my arms around her. "What's wrong?" I asked gently. She didn't speak, just shook her head and buried her face in my chest. "Did he yell at you?" Another shake. Did he touch you? I felt her body stiffen. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I held her until she stopped trembling. And later, when I laid her in bed and watched her fall asleep, I sat in the darkness, wide awake, listening to the creaks of the trailer, the soft breath of my mother down the hallway, and the heavy footsteps of the man in the next room. I knew something was terribly wrong. I just didn't know what to do. There weren't school counselors back then. There wasn't a hotline. There was just the truth and the unbearable weight of carrying it in a world that refused to see. No one in town would have believed me, even if I'd tried to tell. Calvin Garrett was feared but respected. The kind of man people didn't question because it was easier not to. And Mama, she knew. I saw it in her face when Lila would cling to her apron and beg not to be left alone in the room. I saw it when Calvin would call Lila over and Mama would freeze, her eyes going glassy, her hands wringing at her sides. She always turned away. She always looked down. One night, after Lila had another nightmare screaming in her sleep, soaked in sweat, I stood in the kitchen doorway and watched Mama doing the dishes. "We have to leave," I said. She didn't turn around, just kept scrubbing a plate that had long been clean. "Mama, you know what he's doing." Her shoulders stiffened. "I can't," she whispered. "Where would we go? Anywhere's better than here." She set the plate down in the sink and finally turned to face me. And in her eyes, I saw fear. Real, raw, paralyzing fear. Not just of Calvin, but of what it would mean to fight back. And still, I hoped, because in that moment, for the first time, she didn't tell me I was wrong. She didn't tell me to be quiet. She just looked at me, really looked at me, and that was enough. Enough to know that maybe, just maybe, she was ready. That night, after the lights went out, I laid next to Lila and whispered, "I'm going to get you out of here. I don't know how yet, but I swear it." Even in her sleep, she squeezed my hand. I didn't know it yet, but the night everything truly changed started like any other. The air was dry and still, thick with desert dust that crept through every crack in our trailer. I was lying in bed beside Lila, listening to the distant hum of cicadas outside. She'd finally drifted off after another round of tears and whispered, "I don't want to talk about it." Her little hand still clung to mine beneath the blanket. I stared at the ceiling, trying not to breathe too loud. Daddy was still up, pacing, drinking. I could hear the familiar clink of ice in his glass. The smell of bourbon always lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. It made my stomach churn. Mama had gone quiet hours ago, probably curled on the couch again, eyes swollen, soul emptied. I told myself to stay still. Just stay. Wait for morning. But then I heard it. A creak in the hallway. A door opening. Bare feet on the linoleum floor. Not heavy like his usual stomp, softer. Slower. I knew it was him. And I knew he wasn't drunk. That was worse. He didn't make noise when he was sober. He didn't stumble. He calculated. I held my breath, praying he was headed to the bathroom, praying he'd go back to bed. But then, silence. Too long. I glanced at Lila. Her face twitched, a quiet whimper escaping her lips, even in sleep. And suddenly, I knew exactly where he was going. I rose from bed slowly, careful not to wake her, and crept down the hallway. My heart pounded in my ears as I reached the cracked door of my parents' bedroom. A faint light spilled from inside. I peeked through the narrow gap. What I saw still lives behind my eyes. Even now, decades later, Lila was curled at the edge of the bed, her knees to her chest, her eyes wide and wet. She wasn't crying. She wasn't screaming. She was frozen. Her lips trembled like she wanted to speak but couldn't. Daddy Calvin was kneeling beside her. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't hitting anyone. But what he was doing, the way he looked at her, that twisted grin on his face. Mama was in the corner of the room, arms wrapped around herself, rocking slightly like a ghost stuck between realities. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she made no sound. Her mouth moved, whispering things no one could hear. She looked at the floor, like if she didn't acknowledge it, it wouldn't be real. But it was real, and I saw it all. My stomach turned. My body locked up with a cold so deep it felt like death itself had walked into that room. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab Lila and run. I wanted to take that lamp on the dresser and crash it over his damn head, but I couldn't move, so I did the only thing I could. I backed away. My legs barely carried me back to our bedroom. I climbed into bed and wrapped my arms around Lila. She was trembling now in her sleep, a soft moan rising in her throat. I held her tighter than I ever had before, and I cried silently into the pillow, into the night. Something inside me cracked that night. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was rage, a burning, all-consuming rage I didn't know I had in me. I swore I'd get us out of there. Even if I had to drag Lila barefoot across the whole damn desert, I would. The next morning, I didn't say a word. Neither did Mama. Neither did Lila. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She stared at the floor all through breakfast, pushing her toast around her plate. Daddy was quiet, too. He sipped his coffee and watched us like a predator watches prey, calm and patient. Later that day, I caught Mama alone in the kitchen, drying dishes with shaking hands. He touched her. I said, not even whispering. She froze. I saw it. Still. She said nothing. You know what he's doing to her, I snapped, my voice quivering, her eyes closed, tight like she was trying to crush the truth out of her own mind. Jeanette, please. No. No more pretending. I stepped closer. If we don't leave, he's going to destroy her. He's going to take everything she is. I know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. God help me. I know. I couldn't believe it. She'd known this whole time. The bruises on Lila's soul, Mama had seen them. The flinching, the nightmares, the silence. And she'd done nothing. I begged you. I choked. I told you weeks ago. I was afraid. She said, that broke me. We're all afraid. But fear doesn't get to be an excuse anymore. That night, the three of us didn't speak. Calvin was calm, almost cheerful. He hummed a country tune at dinner. He patted Lila's hair on his way to the living room. She stiffened like she'd been electrocuted. I stared at Mama across the table. She nodded once, and I knew she was finally ready. The next day, when Calvin left for work, Mama pulled the mattress off her bed and reached inside the tear at the base. Out came a worn cloth pouch. Inside was maybe $25, all in crumpled bills and quarters. All I could save. She said. I nodded. It'll be enough. I raided Daddy's closet, pretending to clean, and took 2 of his flannel shirts for warmth. In the kitchen, I stuffed bread crusts into a pillowcase and filled a bottle with water. Lila sat on the edge of the couch, her eyes vacant, clutching her doll like it was her last anchor to the world. She doesn't know what's happening. I whispered. She knows enough. Mama replied, folding a sweater into the bundle. We planned to leave that night, after dinner. After he passed out with a bottle in his hand like so many nights before. But nothing ever goes as planned, because that afternoon, Calvin came home early. He stood at the door, not saying a word, watching us. We froze mid-step. I dropped the dishcloth. Mama stopped sweeping. "You're different," he muttered. No one answered. "You're acting strange. You and the girl." He pointed his chin at me. I felt my blood turn to ice. Mama tried to laugh. "Just tired, that's all." He narrowed his eyes. "You're lying. I saw it in his face." He knew. He didn't have proof, but he smelled the fear. Predators always do. That night, the house was too quiet. Lila clung to me again when I put her to bed, but this time, she didn't even close her eyes. She lay stiff, her hand clutching mine like she'd never let go. Then, just before midnight, I awoke with a start. She was gone. I bolted upright, heart hammering. The bed beside me was empty. I ran into the hallway. No sign of her. The living room empty, but the door to my parents' room was closed. I stood there frozen, staring at that door. I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't work. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Just silence, deafening, suffocating silence. And that's when I knew, if we didn't leave soon, I'd lose her. Not just to him, but forever. The next morning, Lila didn't speak a word. She sat at the kitchen table in that same worn flannel nightgown, hunched over a plate of eggs she didn't touch. Her eyes were blank, like she wasn't really there, just a shell. Her little hands trembled as she held the fork. I sat across from her, trying not to cry. Mama stood at the sink, back to us, scrubbing a dish that had been clean for 10 minutes. And Daddy. He sat on the porch with a cigarette in one hand, bourbon in the other, watching the dirt road like he was waiting for something or someone. I kept glancing at the clock. It was past 9 a.m. He should have been at the sawmill an hour ago. But he wasn't going anywhere. He knew. Whether he'd found the pillowcase of supplies under my bed, or heard one of our whispered conversations, or just sensed the shift in the air, he knew. And he was waiting, maybe for us to run, maybe just to see how far we'd try. The tension was unbearable. We didn't breathe. We didn't speak. When he finally came inside, the door creaked with slow dread. His boots thudded against the floor like warning shots. He stood at the end of the kitchen, eyes narrowed, studying each of us. "Why's everyone so quiet today?" he asked. Mama didn't answer. Lila flinched. He reached over, picked up the half-full coffee cup, and took a slow sip. "Something going on I should know about." Still no one answered. He chuckled. Didn't think so. Then he turned and walked into the living room, the chair groaning beneath him as he sat, turning the TV dial without really watching anything. I glanced at Mama. Her face had gone pale, her lips were tight, and her eyes. They were wild with fear. She knew it too. We were out of time. That night, we made no formal plan. No words were exchanged, just looks. Glances that said we do this now, or we never leave. We moved like ghosts around the house, our every step measured, every sound muffled. Around 8 p.m., I tucked Lila into bed, though neither of us expected to sleep. She clung to her doll, one of the arms long gone, and whispered, "Are we leaving?" "Yes," I said. "Tonight." She nodded, then buried her face in the blanket. Mama waited until Calvin dozed off in his chair, bottle slipping from his grip. The smell of liquor soaked the room. She tiptoed into the kitchen and opened the oven door not to cook, but to grab the tin where she'd hidden our money. The $20-some were still there. A miracle. I grabbed the pillowcase from my room, stuffed with bread, 2 apples, and a canteen of water. I'd memorized the route to town from years of running errands on foot. Jerome wasn't far 2 miles if you stayed on the road, 1.5 miles if you cut through the mesquite brush and down through the wash. We were almost ready. Then everything fell apart. Calvin stirred. We froze. His head lolled to the side. For a second, we thought he might go back under, but then his eyes opened. He looked straight at Mama. "What are you doing?" he slurred. Mama didn't answer. His eyes drifted to the tin in her hand, then to me holding the pillowcase. "I knew it," he growled. "You ungrateful bitch." He stood, swaying slightly, then steadied. "You think you can run from me?" My heart raced. Mama's hands trembled. Then, in the most terrifying voice I've ever heard, he whispered, "We going to bed early tonight." Mama swallowed hard. "Calvin, we now." He pointed toward the hallway like a warden ordering inmates back to their cells. We had no choice. We couldn't run, not yet. Not while he was blocking the only door out. Back in our room, I sat beside Lila on the bed, heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. Mama moved around the house like a ghost, turning out the lights as Calvin watched her every move. He locked the front door. We were trapped. I could hear the floor creaking as he walked toward his bedroom. He closed the door but didn't lock it. That told me everything I needed to know. He was waiting. He planned to come for her. Mama entered our room with panic in her eyes. "We have to do it now," she whispered. "We can't wait till he sleeps, but he's still awake." I hissed. "We'll distract him." I blinked. How Mama didn't answer. She walked into the kitchen and turned on the stove. She picked up the kettle and filled it halfway. When it started to hiss, she held it over the flame until it shook with steam. Then, without a word, she dropped it. The clatter rang out like gunfire. Calvin burst from the bedroom. What the hell water splashed across the floor? Scalding hot. Steam rose. Mama clutched her hand like she'd burned it. I grabbed Lila's wrist. "Run," Mama mouthed. I didn't hesitate. I yanked the door open, and Lila and I sprinted into the cold desert night. The air slapped my face like a warning. Behind us, I heard yelling, Calvin screaming, Mama shouting something back, and then a crash. We didn't stop. The yard was endless. My feet were bare, scraping across gravel and dry weeds. Lila stumbled once, nearly falling, but I pulled her up. We tore down the road, dust clouds rising behind us. The full moon lit our path like a cruel spotlight. My lungs burned. My legs screamed, but I kept running because I knew if he caught us, we'd never make it out again. We ran until our legs gave out. Lila's breath came in shallow gasps beside me, her small hand gripping mine so tightly it hurt. The dirt road twisted through the desert, the rocks sharp against our bare feet, but we didn't stop. Not even when the cactus needles tore at our skin. Not even when our lungs screamed for air. Behind us, I could still hear his voice. Calvin. Jeanette. That howl, it wasn't just anger. It was possession, like we were his property, and he'd just found out we'd been stolen. The last time I looked back, I saw his silhouette on the porch, dark against the pale moonlight. He stood there a moment, scanning the road, and then he moved. Mama was no longer shouting. That was the worst part. I didn't know if she'd managed to hold him off or if she'd already paid the price. I squeezed Lila's hand tighter. Don't let go, I said, breathless, no matter what. She nodded, her face streaked with tears and dust. Her knees wobbled, but she didn't stop. We cut off the main road and down into a dry arroyo, the wash that ran through the edge of town and behind the cemetery. The moonlight barely reached down here, and we stumbled more than once over loose rocks and bits of broken brush. At one point, Lila fell hard, skinning her elbow. She whimpered, but I hoisted her up. "We can't stop now," I told her. "Just a little more." My body moved like it belonged to someone else. The pain in my legs, the burning in my chest, it all became background noise. The only thing that mattered was getting Lila to safety. We passed the edge of town around midnight. It looked so still, so quiet, like the world hadn't changed. A porch light flickered here and there. A stray dog barked from behind a fence. Somewhere, a radio played an old country song in the distance. And yet for us, the entire universe was on fire. I didn't know where to go. We couldn't just wander the streets all night, hoping someone would help. In a place like Jerome, people didn't open their doors to trouble. They shut their curtains tighter. But then I remembered Margaret Collins, our neighbor, the only person who'd ever shown a flicker of kindness. She had a sister, Rachel, who lived near the old church on the hill. When I was 10, Mama sent me with a bundle of laundry there once, and I remembered the dusty path behind the chapel, the little white house with blue shutters and a porch swing that creaked in the breeze. It was our only shot. We crossed the train tracks and moved uphill. Lila's legs gave out more than once, but I carried her when I had to. Sweat soaked through my clothes. My teeth chattered despite the summer night. Finally, after what felt like hours, the chapel came into view, St. Brigid's, and beside it, the little white house. I stumbled up the front steps and knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. The porch light clicked on. A shadow moved behind the curtain. Then, the door opened just a crack. A woman peeked through. Her hair was pinned into a tight bun. Her eyes were sharp, tired. "Who's there?" she asked, voice cautious. "My name's Jeanette Garrett. We live outside town. Margaret Collins is our neighbor. Please, we need help." She stared at me for a long time, looked me up and down, looked at Lila behind me, barely able to stand. "Come in," she said at last, and opened the door. The moment we crossed the threshold, I almost collapsed. My knees buckled, and the pillowcase of supplies slipped from my shoulder and hit the floor with a dull thud. Rachel took one look at us and motioned toward the kitchen. "Sit. I'll get water." Lila and I huddled together at the table, our hands sticky with sweat and dirt. The smell of the house was different warm wood, old books, and a faint trace of lavender. It felt like another world. When Rachel returned, she set 2 glasses of water in front of us. "Now," she said, folding her arms, "tell me what happened." I hesitated. How could I explain something so awful? How do you tell a stranger that your father is a monster, and your mother may already be dead? "He hurts us," I said softly. "He hurt my sister." Rachel's face didn't change. She nodded once. "Do you have somewhere to go?" "No." She sighed, ran a hand over her face. "You can stay here tonight, but tomorrow we'll need a plan." I wanted to cry. I wanted to thank her. I wanted to sleep for 100 years. But all I could do was whisper, "Thank you." That night, she gave us a room in the back, a small bed, soft blankets, a window that opened to a yard of wild grass. I tucked Lila in. She looked at me with wide, fearful eyes. "Will Mama find us?" I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. Yes, I lied. She'll find us. She reached for my hand and clutched it tight. "Don't let Daddy take me. I won't." I whispered. She fell asleep with my hand in hers. I stayed awake, listening to every creak, every passing car, every gust of wind. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps outside, and my heart nearly exploded, but it was just a raccoon rattling the garbage can. Still, I didn't sleep. At dawn, Rachel made us oatmeal and toast. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep. She poured me a cup of coffee and sat across from me. "We can't keep you here," she said gently, "but there's a place, a shelter, run by nuns. It's called St. Bridget's Home for Girls." I nodded. "Okay, they'll keep you safe until we know what happened to your mama." I didn't speak. I couldn't. My chest felt like it might split in two. Around noon, Rachel walked us to the shelter. It was behind the chapel, up a small gravel path. A tall nun in a white habit opened the gate. Her name was Sister Bernadette. She looked at us, her face stern, but kind. Rachel explained everything. They ran. They've got no one else. The sister looked down at Lila, then back at me. "You're safe here," she said simply. And for the first time in my life, I believed it. She led us inside, gave us clean clothes, showed us where we'd sleep. There were other girls there, all quiet, all carrying things they didn't say out loud. That night, Lila curled up beside me on the narrow cot. "Is it over?" she asked. I looked at her, her face so small, so tired. "Not yet," I whispered, "but we're close." St. Bridget's shelter sat quiet and still, like a place that didn't quite belong to the world outside. The heavy stone walls held in the silence like it was sacred. There was no yelling here, no doors slamming, no footsteps that made your stomach twist. But peace doesn't come easy, not when you've lived in fear for so long. Lila barely spoke those first few days. She stuck to me like a shadow, her small fingers always gripping the hem of my shirt or the edge of my sleeve. Even when the nuns gave her a soft blanket in her own bed, she crawled into mine at night, tucking herself beneath my arm like she used to when the thunder rolled outside the trailer. Only now, the storms were inside us. The shelter gave us food, warm clothes, a place to sleep, but it didn't give us answers. And the biggest question of all sat in my chest like a stone. Where was Mama? Had she made it out? Had Calvin stopped her? Had she tried to follow us and gotten lost in the dark every day? I waited. Every time the front gate creaked open, my heart jumped. Every set of footsteps down the hall made me sit up straighter. I didn't care if she came in bruised or broken, just so long as she came in. But she didn't, and no one said a word about her. Sister Bernadette, the nun who oversaw the shelter, was firm but not cruel. She didn't ask us many questions. But one morning, while I was folding sheets in the laundry room, she came and stood beside me. "Do you know where your mother might go?" she asked softly. I shook my head. She was supposed to follow us. She nodded, but her face told me what she didn't say. She was losing hope. I wasn't ready to. After a week, I asked if I could walk with the girls to the chapel for evening prayers. Not because I wanted to pray, though maybe I did, but because I needed a way to stay busy. The stillness of the shelter was beginning to crack me open. I'd lay awake at night, clutching Lila's hand, imagining what Calvin might be doing right that moment. If he'd found Mama, if he was coming for us next. Some nights I'd dream of him kicking down the front door, dragging us out by our hair. Other nights, I'd dream of Mama running, calling my name, and I'd wake up crying. But the worst nights were the ones where I dreamed of nothing, because that meant I was getting used to it. Margaret Collins came by the shelter once, bringing a paper bag of apples from her garden and a tin of cornbread. She sat with me under the awning near the courtyard while Lila napped inside. I asked around town. She said, "No one's seen him. Not even Mama, I asked. She hesitated. No, not her either. I nodded, staring at the chipped paint on the stone wall. If she's gone, I'll never forgive myself. She's not gone, Margaret said firmly. Some women fight with their fists. Others just need time to find their feet. She'll come. You'll see. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But days turned into a week, then 2. Lila started to smile again, just a little. The sisters gave her crayons and paper, and she drew flowers and sunrises and houses that looked nothing like ours. Her laughter was quieter than it used to be, like it was still afraid to come out, but it was there. I, on the other hand, was unraveling. One afternoon, while scrubbing dishes with the other girls, I overheard a whisper 2 girls talking about a man who'd been asking questions around town. A big man. Red-faced, angry. I knew who they meant before they even said his name. Calvin Garrett. The dread returned instantly, settling into my bones like winter frost. He hadn't given up. He was looking for us. And Mama still hadn't come. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the edge of the bed, watching Lila's chest rise and fall as she breathed. Her arms were wrapped around that old doll, its stuffing nearly gone. I wondered if she dreamed of Mama too, if she remembered the way Mama used to braid her hair before school, if she remembered her lullabies, because I did, and I couldn't bear the thought of never hearing them again. I needed to know the truth. I couldn't keep hiding in a stone-walled shelter, letting fear gnaw at me every minute of the day. If Mama was out there, she might be looking for us. If she wasn't, I needed to know. I needed to go back. Not to the house, but close. Just enough to see. Just enough to know. The decision came slowly, then all at once. And when it did, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear, resolve. I waited until the shelter fell silent. The hall lights had dimmed to soft glows outside the dorm rooms, and the quiet sounds of sleeping girls filled the space like a lullaby no one asked for. Lila lay curled beside me, her small hand still wrapped in mine. Her breath was soft, peaceful, and it crushed me because I couldn't sleep, not while the worst question still hung in the air like smoke. Was Mama still alive? I untangled myself gently, careful not to wake her. I moved slow, inch by inch, like I used to when sneaking past Calvin's chair after dinner. The fear was familiar old, heavy, but somehow different now. I wasn't running anymore. I was going back. I crept down the hallway barefoot, the cool tile sending chills through me. The chapel candle flickered at the far end like a watchful eye. I passed the kitchen, past Sister Bernadette's room, past the big wooden gate that stood between me and the town, and I reached for the latch. But before I could open it, I heard her voice. "Where do you think you're going?" Girl, I froze. Behind me. Sister Bernadette stood in the shadows, arms folded, her dark veil blending into the dark hallway. I turned slowly. I have to see if my mama's alive. She didn't move. "Do you want to die?" "No," I said quietly, "but I can't live not knowing." The silence stretched. She studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she sighed. "You know he's still out there. I know." Another pause. Then she stepped forward and placed her hand on the latch. With one firm motion, she slid it back and opened the gate. "Then go. But if he finds you, don't say I didn't warn you." I nodded. My legs trembled, but I stepped out into the night. The town lay in silence beneath a sky full of stars. The wind carried the faint scent of sagebrush and distant smoke. I wrapped my arms around myself and began to walk down the gravel path, across the railroad tracks, through the empty streets that still remembered our footsteps from that night. It felt like walking through a memory. When I reached the dirt road leading to our trailer, my heart thudded so hard I thought it might tear out of my chest. I moved slowly now, the gravel biting into my soles. Every sound a distant owl. The rustle of mesquite felt like a threat. And then I saw it. The trailer. Our home. Only it wasn't the same. The screen door hung loose. One window was shattered, jagged glass catching the moonlight. The front fence had collapsed. It looked like the aftermath of a storm, but no one in Jerome had reported a storm that week. I approached carefully, my breath shallow. Inside, everything was overturned. The couch slashed, plates smashed, a chair broken in half. The scent of liquor still lingered, but beneath it, something else, something sour and wrong. "Mama," I whispered. No answer. I stepped deeper in, my knees wobbling. Then I saw it on the floor near the hallway, a torn strip of flannel, red and blue, Mama's dress. I dropped to my knees and clutched it in both hands. My throat clenched. She had been here. She had tried to run. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Outside. I scrambled backward, heart in my throat. The footsteps came closer, crunching gravel with each measured step. I ducked behind the kitchen counter, hands over my mouth. Then a voice low, rough, familiar slithered through the silence. Jeanette. He was here. Calvin. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could do was stay hidden, my pulse screaming in my ears. His boots scraped the porch, then thudded against the floor inside. He was in the trailer, and he was looking for me. Thought you'd come back. He muttered, knew you would. I closed my eyes, praying for silence. Then I heard it. The back door creaked open. And another voice, this one hoarse, trembling but unmistakable. Don't touch her. Mama. She was alive. Don't touch her. The words hit the air like thunder in the middle of a drought. I froze behind the counter, mouth dry, hands pressed to the floor to keep from trembling. Then I heard his voice, Calvin, shift. Well, well, he sneered. You're still alive. Barely, Mama said, her voice low but steady, but not afraid of you anymore. From the way the footsteps shifted, I knew they were facing off now just a few feet away. I crept around the edge of the cabinet, heart pounding in my chest like a drum. There she was, Mama. Her face was bruised, one arm clutched to her ribs, but her eyes were blazing, fierce and full of fire. She stood between Calvin and the hallway, like a mother bear guarding her cub. You let her go, she said. She's not yours to hurt. She's mine, he hissed. You're both mine. Mama didn't flinch. You don't own us. Then he moved toward her. I didn't think, I just acted. I grabbed the cast iron skillet from the stove and rose from my hiding spot. My feet barely touched the ground. I rushed forward and swung with everything I had. The skillet slammed into his back with a sickening crack. He howled, stumbling forward. Mama grabbed a glass from the counter and smashed it into his arm. He roared, spun toward me, but I ducked back behind the cabinet. Mama grabbed my wrist. Run. We flew out the door, our bare feet pounding across the gravel. Behind us, Calvin screamed, cursing, crashing into furniture as he tried to follow. But he was bleeding, dazed, slowed down. The stars blurred above us as we ran. The air was dry and sharp, but I didn't care. Mama gripped my hand like she'd never let it go again. We didn't stop until we reached the edge of town. Only then did we slow down, gasping, leaning against each other. Our bodies ached. My arms were scratched raw. Mama was limping, her lips split. But we were alive, and we were free. We walked the rest of the way to the shelter in silence. I glanced at her every few seconds, needing to confirm she was real, that I wasn't dreaming. She looked down at me once and smiled, faint and tired. "I knew you'd get her out," she said. "I thought you were gone." I whispered. I almost was. She told me that after we ran, Calvin had locked her in the bedroom for 2 days. No food, no light. He'd beat her once, then gone out drinking. When she heard his truck pull away, she smashed the window with a coat hanger, climbed out barefoot, and ran to the neighbors. But no one would help. No one wanted trouble with Calvin Garrett. So she waited until the bruises healed enough to move. And then she came back, looking for us. I was going to burn the whole place down if he'd touched her again, she said, teeth clenched. At the shelter gates, Sister Bernadette stood waiting. She'd known I'd gone back, and she wasn't alone. Rachel Collins stood beside her with a deputy. The moment Mama stepped into the light, the sister gasped. "Dear God," the deputy moved forward. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Mama looked at him square in the eye. "I'd like to file a report." And that was the beginning of the end for Calvin Garrett. The trial didn't take long. Once Mama filed the report, everything moved faster than we expected. The bruises on her arms, the statement I gave, the quiet whispers around town that had simmered for years, folks who had seen Calvin's rage, who had turned a blind eye, now came forward with trembling confessions. Calvin was arrested 2 days later in a gas station just outside Cottonwood. He still had blood on his shirt and bourbon in his breath. When the officers brought him in, he didn't fight. He just laughed, but his laughter didn't last. The court listened. The photos of Mama's injuries, my testimony, Lila's quiet presence in the courtroom, clutching Mama's hand with wide, fearful eyes, said more than any lawyer could. The jury didn't need much time. Calvin Garrett was sentenced to 15 years without parole. It wasn't enough, not for everything he'd done, but it was something. And more importantly, it meant we could finally sleep through the night. After the trial, Mama didn't want to go back to the trailer. None of us did. So Margaret Collins, God bless her, helped us find a small rental house closer to town. Just 2 bedrooms, but clean and safe. It had a little garden out back and a front porch with a swing. We made it a home. Mama took a job at the diner. I started helping at the local library, where the air always smelled like dust and old pages. Lila went back to school, slowly learning to laugh again. We all healed in our own way. Some days were harder than others. There were mornings Mama couldn't get out of bed, nights when Lila would wake up screaming, and I still couldn't stand the smell of whiskey or the creak of heavy boots on a wooden floor. But we were together. That made all the difference. And somewhere in that quiet new life in that house, with chipped paint and wildflowers growing through the fence, I began to dream, not of running, not of hiding, but of becoming something, someone. Time moved forward, even when it felt like I couldn't. I turned 18 the following spring. Lila was 10 by then, her front teeth growing back in, her hair longer, softer. She was thriving bright in a way I'd never had the chance to be at her age. Mama started smiling again, too. Not the fake, weary curve of her lips from the past, but a real, open smile, the kind she'd hidden away since the day she married Calvin Garrett. And me, I went back to school. I got my GED, then enrolled in a small community college nearby. I studied social work not because I wanted to fix the world, but because I knew what it meant to be broken in it. And I knew what it meant to be saved by someone who simply listened. Years passed. Lila grew into a strong, kind-hearted woman. She got a scholarship and became a counselor for children who'd lived through the kind of things we'd barely survived. Mama eventually opened a small thrift store in downtown Jerome. She called it Second Chances. It was perfect. Now I sit here on our porch, older, slower, a few creaks in my bones, but a steady fire in my heart. I'm 78 now. My name is Jeanette Garrett, and this life, this quiet, tender life, it was earned, not given. We built it from the ashes, and every time I look at Lila playing with her grandchildren under the cottonwood tree in our yard, I remember that night, the one where we ran barefoot, with nothing but a pillowcase and our will to survive. And I whisper thank you to Mama, to Margaret, to Sister Bernadette, to every woman who dared to speak, even with a shaking voice, because that's where freedom begins, not in boldness, but in bravery. If there's one thing I want you to carry from my story, it's this: silence protects no one. What we don't say can wound us just as deeply as what's been done to us. But the moment we speak, even if our voice trembles, even if our story is soaked in pain, we start to heal. You are never too old, never too young, and never too broken to choose yourself. Whether you are 18 or 78 like me, your story matters, your pain matters, and your freedom is worth fighting for. So if you're carrying something heavy, I hope you'll share it with someone who listens, because healing doesn't come in a single moment. It comes in many, one brave choice at a time. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Did my story touch something in your heart? Have you ever had to choose between fear and freedom? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you believe stories like mine deserve to be heard, please subscribe to this channel for more true stories of courage, healing, and hope. Your voice may be the one someone else needs to hear today. Thank you for listening, for remembering, and for being part of this journey with me.